invite to the stage, it feels like, to the stage Chancellor Roberts, who will give his remarks, and then he'll be followed by interim Provost Dean, who will give his remarks, and then we have a pretty ample amount of time for Q&A following that. So, Chancellor Roberts, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Kramer. Indeed, a difficult act to follow. I read the same article in the Chronicle. I really recommend it to everybody. I also recommend watching Dr. Kramer's Jefferson Award acceptance speech. And if you haven't read Dr. Kramer's book, Traveling to Unknown Lands, I highly recommend that. Everybody will enjoy reading it. So thank you, Dr. Kramer. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for your service to the university and to the Faculty Council. And congratulations to the Faculty Council on the 75th anniversary. I'm honored to be here with you. And there's always a lot to celebrate among the faculty. I want to mention two faculty members in particular. One is we have an economist, John Williams, who was just named Chief Economist of the Federal Communications Commission. And we have an astronomer, Nicholas Law, who just received a huge gift to build what's called the Argus Array, which is an array of 800 medium aperture telescopes assembled into a common hemispherical dome, which is going to be a groundbreaking tool in astronomical research. So congratulations both to Dr. Williams and to Dr. Law. I was going to talk a little bit about, thank you. A little bit about the Carolina North conversation that we had with the trustees last week, touch on the skill report, in which I know there is some interest, and talk a little bit about the federal and state budget situation, and we look forward to the discussion. With respect to Carolina North, what we said to the trustees last week, and maybe some of you heard these remarks or followed this discussion, but we see three dynamics overlapping simultaneously. One is the explosive growth of the state itself. So we're going to be the 7th largest state by 2030. We added 145,000 people just last year in North Carolina, third fastest growing state after Texas and Florida. And that puts more demand on the UNC system generally and on the flagship in particular. And we've talked in the past about our plans to grow enrollment gradually over time to try to reflect the growth of the state and fulfill our mission of service to the people of the state. At the same time, we have tremendous growth in demand for STEM majors. So within the college, we used to be about a third social sciences, humanities, and STEM. We're now about half STEM majors, and that's without having an engineering school. Teaching STEM requires newer facilities that have to be kept up to date. If you look at biology, for example, which is our fastest growing major, largest major in the college, second most popular major overall, that requires additional facilities to teach all of those incoming biology majors. The third factor is the lack of affordable housing for working families in Chapel Hill. We've talked about this before. Chapel Hill is a wonderful college town. It's increasingly unaffordable for working families, and that's the university's problem as much as it is the town's problem. Most households in the town, one way or another, have a connection to the university. The biggest public policy issue in the town is the lack of affordable housing. The mayor, who was just reelected unopposed, has made affordable housing a centerpiece, the theme of her time as mayor. So most universities can't do anything about that, about those kinds of challenges, because they are landlocked. We, on the other hand, are fortunate enough to own, the people of North Carolina own, 800 acres a mile and a half from here. And we believe we have not just the opportunity, but the obligation to use that resource to fulfill our mission, to help serve the state as it continues to grow, to help us expand enrollment, to fulfill the demand for STEM majors and help address the challenges of affordable housing in the town. The mayor has said there is no comprehensive solution to the affordable housing challenge in the town of Chapel Hill without Carolina North. It's really the only large piece of developable land in the town. And so we announced that we're going to begin the development process. It's obviously a long-term project. Beginning the process means that we're putting out an RFP for a master developer to help us plan the site. We envision that the first use at the site will be more housing, so 2,200 student beds. We have a significant shortage of student housing as well as a shortage of housing in the town. Not just an inability to house as many of our students who want housing, but a lot of older housing that is aging out or needs significant renovation. And we announced a stakeholder advisory committee to help us plan out Carolina North. So there are 3 co-chairs from the faculty, Anita Brown-Graham, from the town, Aaron Nelson, who is head of the chamber, but is also an alum and a former Carolina student body president, and Brian Allen from the board of trustees. So that's going to be a broad-based group. If you're interested in serving on the stakeholder advisory committee, or if you have a recommendation for others who you think should participate, please get in touch with Dr. Brown-Graham and let her know of your interest. There's been a lot of discussion about the basketball arena in the context of Carolina North, and just for whatever it's worth, we haven't made any decisions about the arena. We think that Carolina North is a possible location. There's no perfect location. I'd be happy to give you, if you're interested, chapter and verse about why we feel the need to make a decision about the arena now. And trust me, this is an issue I would much rather avoid. I understand how sensitive and high profile this is, but we've reached a point with the current arena where significant capital investment is required no matter what we do. So before we spend significant money patching the existing arena, we think it's our responsibility to step back and make sure that we're making the best decision that we can. What's going to help us have a successful basketball program? What's going to be best for our students, whose program it is? And what will make for the best fan experience, which is important as college sports and sports generally continue to change very rapidly. I suspect some of you are sitting here thinking, well, this is great, but I'm in an office that has a window unit and the elevator's on the fritz. And our investments in Carolina North are not at the expense of investing here on campus. So we recently renovated Bingham Hall. I think I've mentioned before, I really encourage everyone to go take a look at that. It's a great example of what we can do with a 100-year-old building right in the heart of campus. On the inside, it looks like a brand new classroom building. The communications department is housed in there now. We have renovation plans underway for Hamilton, Phillips, Gardner, Chapman, all buildings here in the heart of campus that are being renovated or otherwise improved. We're also adding to and rebuilding our student housing here on campus. So we talked before about the new dorm that is being built where Jackson Hall is now, where the admissions department is, 720 student beds roughly, the first new dorm in that part of campus in a generation. We renovated Avery Dorm in time for this past academic year, and if you go up Stadium Drive from Avery Dorm, all of that housing was built around the same time as Avery and therefore needs renovation at the same time. Parker, Teague, Carmichael. We're going to demolish Parker and Teague, since renovation costs about as much as building a new dorm, and you get actually less capacity when you renovate a dorm. That area, that location is such a important location on campus. If we have a heart of campus, that's it. Our plan there is to demolish Parker and Teague and build new dormitory space in that location. We also have a renovation of Hinton James planned, and those residential projects that I just mentioned were all previewed for the Board of Governors on Wednesday, along with a series of other housing requests from across the UNC system. So delighted to answer any questions about Carolina North or about our plans for the physical master plan for the campus generally. Quickly on skill, I know there's a lot of interest in the skill report. Just as a reminder, given a series of accusations and claims that were made about skill, we asked for a third-party independent review of the allegations and claims. We have that draft report now. We're going through it. We're trying to figure out how to get that to a final report and how we can make the conclusions known. I know the provost and I think Dr. Gerhardt, who's been involved in the process, are going to have more to say about that, but I just wanted to let you know where that stood, since I've been asked about that in the past. And then I wanted to spend a little bit of time telling you our view of where we are with the budget, and I really view that in two large components, the federal budget and the state budget. So both are moving targets, but with respect to the federal budget, I think of the federal budget in three components. There's the question about prospective federal research funding for the main agencies that fund us. There's this ongoing discussion about F&A reimbursement, with which I think most of you are familiar. And then there's the question about grants that have already been made that have been subject to termination or stop work orders. So going in reverse order there, with respect to terminations, as you know, this time last year, we were starting to see a flurry of terminations starting about 10 or 11 months ago. I believe it's true to say that over the course of this academic year, we have seen very few terminations. We were at about 3.5% of our overall federal research funding in total terminations. And as I've said before, while that's devastating for the teams who are involved, it's not an exaggeration to say that in many cases they've lost their life's work. That 3.5% is within our average normal variance in federal research funding. And most importantly, it's stayed stable over the course of this academic year. So we were worried last summer and at the beginning of this academic year that the terminations would continue and that we would see an increase in the percentage of our federal research funding that was affected by these terminations and stop work orders. That has not happened. However, there's still significant uncertainty over federal research funding, as most of you know. This F&A question, the question of what our reimbursement rate will be, is still subject to an ongoing discussion between a group of universities, of which we are one, participating in a working group with the Federal Budget Office. We thought there was going to be resolution on that back in September. It obviously hasn't happened. We're not sure what is going to happen. In the meantime, we're still being reimbursed at our 55%, but there's a significant question mark still hanging over the methodology through which federal grantors will be reimbursing us for overhead and what those dollar amounts will look like for us and for all of our peer research institutions. And then with respect to appropriations for federal funding, federal research agencies going forward, this is kind of a real-time discussion given where the federal budget process is. But as most of you likely know, in regular order, the federal government does not pass one omnibus budget. They pass 13 different appropriations bills some of which contain components for agencies that fund us. So the appropriations bill that contains the National Science Foundation, that's the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriation Bill, has been passed and signed by the President and includes a 3% cut to the National Science Foundation. That's obviously not great. It's significantly more funding for the NSF than the White House originally proposed, but it's a net negative, 3% down compared to the previous fiscal year. There's another appropriations bill, the Labor HHS Education Appropriations Bill, that includes NIH and ARPA. That bill has not been passed by the Senate or signed by the President. It's been passed by the House. As you all probably know, federal funding authority expires at midnight tonight. We expect, again, moving target, but we expect what's going to happen is that Congress is going to wrap that bill, the Labor HHS Education Bill, in with 4 other appropriations bills and pass one omnibus funding bill, hopefully before midnight, to avoid a shutdown. That bill, the Labor HHS Education Bill, includes an increase to NIH. What the House passed is an increase to NIH of 0.9% and holds ARPA flat. So that's positive news as it relates to NIH, obviously, again, especially given the context of the original White House proposal. What's clear, though, with respect to federal funding overall is that the structure and the process and the priorities of federal research funding are changing. The legislative debate about NIH and NSF funding was full of discussion about the need to update and revisit the priorities of NIH and NSF funding, which obviously creates uncertainty for us as one of the top 10 recipients of federal research funding. At the state level, I was interested in hearing you talk, Dr. Kramer, because I've been reading the autobiography of Kemp Battle, who was president of the university during Reconstruction. And as they were trying to restart the university as it closed, after it closed during Reconstruction, they had 2 sources of revenue primarily. They had tuition revenue, and they had a scholarship funded by the state that provided for 1 student from each county to come to Carolina. And then, this is in the 1880s, they were very optimistic about receiving the new federal land grant funding. But what happened to Kemp Battle's dismay is that the land grant funding from the federal government went to the new school, State College, now NC State, established by the General Assembly in Raleigh, instead of coming to Carolina. And then Wake, Duke, Trinity College at the time, and Davidson banded together to lobby against the continuation of the scholarship to Carolina, thinking it was an unfair competitive advantage to Carolina that there was a scholarship available to 1 student from each county. And that scholarship was discontinued by the General Assembly. And so Dr. Battle was faced with the loss of the main public source of revenue, the loss of the prospective revenue that he thought he was going to achieve from land grant, and having to depend entirely on tuition, which had never been the primary source previously, and philanthropic support as a way to keep the university going. And he talks extensively in his autobiography about it being the first time that the university really reached out to its alumni and supporters for philanthropic support. So maybe things don't change all that much over the decades. Where we are right now with the state budget is that we don't have one. We're the only state in the country that has not passed a budget. And that's important because the primary state appropriation that we receive is tied to enrollment, and it's funded in arrears, meaning that we now, because there's not a state budget, we don't have the funding for either the current freshmen or the current sophomores. In other words, half of the undergraduate student body has not yet been funded by the General Assembly, not just here, but across the UNC system, because we don't have a budget. The BOT passed, as you probably know, at their previous meeting, not the one last week, approval of a tuition and fees increase, the first tuition increase in 9 years. Tuition is a limited tool for us for several reasons. Our resident tuition is 82% of our undergraduate student body, as you all know. We can only raise resident undergraduate tuition by 3% a year. Current students are protected from any tuition increase. So it takes 4 years for the impact of a tuition increase to fully flow through to our revenue. And we're required to stay in the bottom quartile of our peer group, no matter what else we do on resident tuition. Right now, there are 11 universities in our peer group, and we're number 10. We could actually raise tuition by almost $3,000 a year and still stay in the bottom quartile. That's how low our tuition has been. But we have these constraints about how quickly and by how much we can raise undergraduate resident tuition. Similarly, on fees, we have the lowest fees in the UNC system, but we can only raise fees by 3% a year. When you take all of all the fees paid by students combined, they can collectively only rise by 3% a year. So we've put in for the 3% increase for both tuition and fees, but as I say, it's a limited tool. Non-resident tuition, we're committed to raising non-resident tuition to get it in line with market rates. That's a moving target. We're trying not to raise non-resident tuition by more than 10% a year, because that flows through immediately. Families who have students currently enrolled see that increase in their tuition bill right away. And so our view has been, just for predictability and certainty, it's unfair to raise tuition more than 10% year over year. But our peer group is raising tuition so quickly that what we thought was going to be a 2-year program of increasing tuition by 10% each year over 2 years is now going to be at least 3 years of 10% increases to get tuition in line with market rates, and again, only affects 18% of our undergraduate student body. At the same time, there's a performance funding component to the system allocation that is a net negative for us based on a recent system decision, costs us about $7 million a year. And we had hoped that the General Assembly would include State and Carolina in the sports gambling revenue allocation that is currently provided to every system school besides State and Carolina. We believe that would happen if they passed a budget, but they have not yet done so. And so the point is that most of our primary revenue drivers are either under threat or at a minimum uncertain. And we believe that if and when a state budget is passed, that they might either not fully fund enrollment growth, which would disproportionately hurt Carolina, or they would pair funding of enrollment growth with a flex cut requiring budget savings at Carolina and at other system schools. That's the context in which the Board of Trustees was acting when they mandated last summer that we find $70 million in savings, and their updated resolution from last week that increased that to about $86, $87 million. And I know the area study centers are a highly salient issue. The reason that the board asked for $7 million in savings from centers is because it seems likely that if a state budget is passed, the legislative discussion has been to impose a $36 million cut on centers and institutes as part of a flex cut to the UNC system budget, which, as to Carolina, as the home of the plurality of centers and institutes in the overall system, would require a significant reduction from us. So that's the context in which the Board of Trustees has been operating. That's the thinking behind the Service First initiative, which over time we hope will achieve savings and we believe can deliver better operational results for what I think of as support services, finance, HR, IT. I would add that every one of our peer institutions has a similar streamlining, cost savings, budget cutting initiative underway. Cal, UCLA, Michigan, UVA, Texas, Ohio State all have similar initiatives underway. I would also just mention three other things very quickly, and then I'll stop talking. One is that I have heard some people say, well, how can you spend money on X when you're cutting money over here for priority Y? And my response to that is twofold. One is that our funds are not fungible across categories, and I think most people who work with things like federal research grants understand that. But we can't take money from, say, the football program and allocate it to the study centers, even any more than we could take a federal grant for the area study centers or a philanthropic gift for the area study centers and devote it to the football program. Most of our funding doesn't work that way. But more importantly, I really just reject the idea that if we're spending money somewhere, we have to be spending money everywhere. We don't have a giant switch in the basement of South Building that says spend more, spend less. We have an enormously complex institution, and as the world changes around us, we are always going to be increasing our spending in some areas and reducing our spending in others, and I expect that always to be true going forward, and I suspect it always has been true in the past. The other two things I'd say briefly about the area study centers in particular, and I know the provost has something to say about this as well. One is that the most distressing thing to me about the discussion about the area study centers has been a conclusion, and I've received a lot of emails and letters and phone calls about this, has been a conclusion that it represents Carolina turning its back on the world. Carolina deciding that we don't need to be a global university. I'm not saying that's an illegitimate conclusion. I understand how people could have drawn that conclusion from the decision that we made. I'm just saying that was not the intent of the decision. I'll just reiterate that we believe it's crucial to be a global university. We have 47% of our students studying abroad. That puts us in the top 10 nationally. Our number of international undergraduate students is constrained by the out-of-state cap, but we're at about 10% total international students, 5% undergraduate, and that number went up this year when most of our peers were going down. I'll just mention personally, I've spent about 10 of my 57 years living and working abroad. I've got a son getting a master's degree in London right now. I understand the importance of international engagement and global relationships to this university. The other thing I'll say just about the area study centers in particular, the whole process obviously left a lot to be desired in all kinds of ways. But I learned yesterday that the Faculty Executive Council had passed a resolution about the area study centers that was intended to be voted on, or maybe will be voted on, here at the Faculty Council meeting. And the memo that came out from Dean White, the dean of the college, therefore could have been seen, I'm sure by many of you was seen as in some sense thumbing our nose at shared governance, at faculty governance. I'm confident that that was not Dean White's intention, that that was just a miscommunication, and there was not an intent in any way to usurp faculty governance or in any way thumb our nose at the faculty governance process. So I'm sorry that it played out that way. I look forward to the discussion. I know the provost has more to say about a couple of these topics. And again, thank you as always for having us here. I'm sorry to go on a little bit longer than I normally do.